Hello and welcome to the Tillage Edge with me, Michael Hennessy. This is your regular update for all your tillage news and advice. Energy cost increases have been a huge topic of discussion in the past 6 months since the invasion of Ukraine. There are more and more discussions now centering on the potential energy outages this autumn across Ireland. Let's hope it doesn't get to this, as it's a long winter's night without electricity to power lights, heating and the TV. However, there's a much more serious outcome if farmers need electricity to power critical infrastructure in their farmyards, such as grain stores or potato stores or workshops. There may be a few solutions farmers could avail of to keep their businesses running. And to discuss that, I'm delighted to be joined by Barry Caslin, a Bioenergy Specialist in Teagasc. Barry, you've been advising and promoting renewable energies in the farming sector for a long time now, but I suppose, look, it's been probably a little bit difficult, a bit of an uphill kind of struggle, as the margins probably weren't there without good government support. But look, I suppose the hugely increased energy costs has probably renewed government and maybe EU view of renewable energy over the last little while. What's it looking like now, or how are governments viewing the renewable sector now?
Yeah, well, absolutely. If you look at the whole issue right across Europe, we have geopolitical issues in terms of that's driving up gas prices right across Europe. So we've seen the price of gas, and we buy gas in what's called terms of energy. So, 2 years ago we were buying gas at 50 pence per therm. Today we're buying it at over €5 per therm. So that's a tenfold increase in gas prices. There's about seven, and if you take Ireland alone, we're importing most of our gas is coming in from the UK, Norway. We're not as dependent on Russian gas as countries like Germany would be. But at the same time, that pool of gas is going to be in hotter demand. You will see the price of it increasing even more. So there's 700,000 houses in Ireland that are dependent on gas to heat their homes. Half our electricity is produced using gas in Ireland also. So we're very, very dependent on that as a fossil fuel feedstock for our energy needs. It's the expected supply of gas on the European market is expected to diminish over the winter. There's expected to be, I suppose, curtailed supplies in many European countries. That's going to have a knock-on effect in Ireland and other countries. And I suppose that's why the whole area of renewables is seeing a renewed impetus or drive behind it at European level. So I suppose that's why we're looking at technologies such as solar and anaerobic digestion, solar PV, the likes of biomass boilers, and of course energy efficiency as well, which
Sure.
can be ways of decreasing the demand or requirement for renewable for energy.
And Barry, did I see the EU carved out a pretty big budget there to fund extra renewable energies over the next number of years?
Yeah, there have been, I suppose, been an allocation to the various countries, a requirement for them to implement through their national action plans to implement renewable energy technologies where possible. Now, some countries are moving at different paces with that. Some countries are well ahead, like Sweden and indeed Germany as well, whereas other countries are coming from a very low base. So we are going to be seeing in Ireland, we will be seeing more supports for the likes of technologies such as biogas to replace the natural gas that's in the gas grid at the moment. You'll see supports for the likes of solar PV at much greater levels. So, you're going to see vast tracts of land covered with the likes of solar PV panels. And make no mistake about it, there is going to be a massive demand for land. Renewables won't happen, Michael, without land. So whether that's land for biomass to produce, energy crops, or whether it's grass to feed anaerobic digesters, land is going to be needed for that. It'll be needed for wind turbines. It'll be needed for solar PV panels. So this is, I suppose, farmers will be in a very enviable position in terms of the fact that they have the land to host these renewable technologies.
And to a degree, Barry, I don't know, we've probably heard a lot of this before. Renewables tried to take off before in the past, and probably some of the bigger massive energy companies maybe have taken on the wind and that kind of thing. But it's always been hard to get back down to farmer level. When do you think there'll be money on the table? When do you think there'll be something tangible that a farmer can actually get their hands on to kind of say, geez, you know what, I see a business plan there and away I go?
Yeah, I suppose most of the supports that are there at the moment, Michael, are for the likes of microgeneration for solar PV. And that's actually making sense at the moment. Certainly for dairy farmers, pig and poultry farmers, it's making sense for them to be considering solar PV at a microgeneration level for their own self-consumption. And actually the scheme has been designed more on self-consumption, where you're offsetting your own import requirements for electricity, rather than what we see in other countries whereby you get paid to export and get paid handsomely to export large amounts of electricity on the grid. That doesn't seem to be the journey of travel for Ireland. So it seems to be more that the supports are being given to offset your own import requirements.
And what about some of the other bigger stuff, energy, Barry? Because we get to the solar PV in a second. The other kind of bigger stuff, the wind, or you talked about the digesters and some of those kind of things, or maybe even growing the likes of bioenergy willows and things like that in the past, which tried to take off but never really did get anywhere, to try and burn that to make electricity. Is there any view on when money might be on the table for something like those?
I think everything is being discussed at the moment, Michael, at behind the scenes in relation to energy crops, pulpwood from forestry. Basically, we're looking at everything that's available that can be used to meet our future energy needs going forward. I suppose we don't want to see a situation whereby whole trees are being burnt. It's only the pulpwood we want to see being combusted for energy purposes. And at the moment, with the way energy prices are, we could have a very unsustainable situation if we see whole trees being burnt to generate electricity or heat. I suppose in relation to the larger projects, that you mentioned there as well, the likes of solar PV on large scales, where you see hundreds of acres covered with panels, where you see large areas covered with wind turbines. There is a massive plan for offshore wind. There's issues with foreshore licenses there at the moment, but we are going to see a lot of our gigawatts of electricity in the future being produced from offshore wind. But there will be a large requirement for onshore wind as well as the solar PV, and the RES scheme is covering that. That's the Renewable Electricity Support Scheme. So that covers those, and there's been two auctions. That's an auction-based support mechanism. There's been two auctions to date. So there's been probably up to 5,000 acres of land that has been given the green light for solar PV through that. Some of that has already started. I think the first one was in Wicklow. It was on the news a few weeks ago.
Barry, just before you get into that, we might just go back a little bit, because just to make sure we have everybody with us, and we might just talk about solar PV, and actually, I wouldn't mind you just giving me just a little quick update as regards, well, what is it? How does it work? How efficient is it? And typically how long a panel would actually last, or a kind of a field of them, or whatever might last. And we'll come back then to maybe how much land is going to take up there in a little while. So maybe just in terms of how efficient is PV? What is it? How does it work? That kind of thing.
So solar PV, or solar photovoltaic as it's called, it converts the energy from the daylight and the sun into electricity. So it's a well-proven technology. It's you can have it at a large scale, or you can have it at a small scale. Generally, for a domestic dwelling house, you're talking about maybe 3 to 5 kilowatts of solar PV would be required. For a dairy farm at maybe 100 cows, you're talking about maybe 9 to 11 kilowatts of solar PV would be required. Some businesses could go much higher than that. But it's a very well proven technology, and the government policy is there to electrify heating and transport. So at the moment, the average house or domestic dwelling house would use in the region of maybe 4,500 kilowatt hours of electricity per year. That's set to increase in the future as houses move away from kerosene to heat them, and gas to heat them, and more to heat pumps. So you're going to see electrification of the heat source in those houses, whereby a compressor will run the heat pump, and that compressor runs on electricity. You will see cars being charged at houses in the future, again increasing the demand for electricity at domestic level. So that's the government policy, is to electrify heating and transport. Electricity prices are trending upwards. Solar PV panels work very, very well in Irish conditions.
In terms of the sunlight, I mean, we're a long ways up on the planet Earth, I suppose, a long ways up north. We've lots of sunlight during 4 or 5 months of the year, and not so much in the rest of the year. How is there enough sunlight there? Is it worthwhile?
Yeah, it's making sense. Like, the output is very predictable in terms of the kilowatt output that you get per year. So it's possible to say that from 1 kilowatt of a solar PV array should get in the region of maybe 800 to 1000 kilowatt hours of electricity from that kilowatt installed. The panels that do need to be faced south are east-west orientation to maximize the sunshine during the day. It's not recommended to face them north. If you do, you won't be capturing all the sun. You know, and it depends on your business, Michael, as well. That will determine, you know, that will determine what you're going to get out of it in the year. So if a dairy farm that is a spring calf and herd, for example, they're going to have that bell-shaped production where they'll be producing most of their electricity between February and November. It goes down for January, it goes down for December in terms of the production potential of electricity. That can be remotely monitored. So it's possible from your mobile phone to observe to see how many kilowatt hours of electricity you're producing at any given time during the day. And they should be sized so that the output is less than the base load of the farm, because there's no point in oversizing these panels. There's no point in putting in higher kilowatt capacity than what you actually require, because you're not going to get paid for doing that at the moment.
Okay, and I'm kind of conscious that some of our listeners are very much tillage, and they're probably screaming at Con, yeah, I'm a tillage farmer, I'm not a bloody dairy farmer. They're probably shouting that at us at the moment. So just going back a little bit, just in terms of, you mentioned the orientation there a second ago. Can these, and you're saying orientated towards the south, but where can these lads be, or these panels be installed? Is it on sheds, or is it on the ground? And if you are installing them there, do they need planning permission?
Yeah, so they do require planning permission if they go over a certain size. So if you take a domestic dwelling house, and I mentioned to you already that a domestic dwelling house would require between maybe 3 and 5 kilowatts of solar PV. If the limit on a domestic dwelling house today is 12 square meters. So roughly every kilowatt would require a space of around 5 square meters. So if you divide 5 into 12, that's just over 2. You're just talking about over 2 kilowatts you can get away with in a domestic house without requiring planning permission. On an agricultural building, so if you had a grain store, if you had a potato cooling refrigeration and cooling requirement, and you were putting panels on a potato store, for example, you would be putting up, you would probably require maybe 50 kilowatts of PV, but you will only be able to put up 9 kilowatts in the absence, you know, otherwise you'll require planning permission. And that's obviously an added cost to the whole proposal as well, when you actually have to go for planning. And that's set to change, Michael, as well. And that's an important point, that planning is not, that this upper limit of 50 square meters is supposed to be removed fairly soon, because it's certainly a limiting factor, or it's delaying the many projects getting underway.
Okay. Is there any fear, and Barry, say, you talked there about a potato store, which can be relatively large sheds, and it's a relatively big surface area on top of at least one side of those sheds, so you can put PV panels on. Is there any risk that the local county council could look at those going up onto it and kind of say, well, hang on there, that's not a commercial scenario, that's not a farming output, that's a commercial output, and that's a potential exposure to commercial rates there?
Yeah, this has come up before, and it's something that needs to be, I suppose, clarified before somebody goes ahead with their project. And I suppose you need to speak to the local planners within your local authority to get that one ironed out. But I certainly have heard that being raised before, and it could be a potential issue. Okay.
And you mentioned, I know you talked about dairy farmers now, but if we switch that back again to what you were talking about in terms of the potato store, and I think you mentioned already, to get the best out of the PV, or the electricity coming out of the PV, it's self-use. But is there no hope at all of selling stuff off to the grid, or what's the price differential realistically between the two of them potentially going to be?
Yeah, I suppose within tillage systems, it's probably making more sense for potato farmers who have a cooling requirement to look at the PV. I suppose they'd be looking maybe at dryers where there'd be electric fans, there'd be refrigeration requirements, there'd be a certain amount of ventilation fans, or maybe recirculating fans, or lighting as well. You know, that's something that certainly needs to be looked at on potato stores. There's great variances in terms of the costs between fluorescent and moving to LED. That's something where savings can be made there as well. But in terms of exporting electricity back to the grid, we expect now that the official date that was given was August, that there would be possible to export excess electricity back to the grid by August of this year. Now we're in August as we speak today, but there is, I would hope that by the end of the year that you will be able to export back to the grid and get your clean export premium, which is 13.5 cents per kilowatt hour. Now, don't forget you can get a TAMS grant as well, but if you do get a TAMS grant, 40% TAMS grant, you will not be able to get the clean export premium and export back to the grid. So you have to either go for one or the other. You have to decide at the outset, are you going to take the TAMS grant, or are you going to go for the other option where you're going to forfeit the TAMS grant and pay for it outright and get your clean export premium or your clean export guarantee from your electricity utility provider.
Okay, and I'm right in saying that you can export it for 13.5 cents per kilowatt hour, but if the farmer was to use it himself and displace what might be bought in, that's probably going to be 30, maybe even 35 cents a kilowatt hour. So it certainly makes more sense to use it themselves.
It's very variable in terms of what people are paying across the country, and it's well worthwhile sitting down and looking at, even switching your provider, potentially getting a better deal on your electricity for the next 12 months. There's great variation out there, and savings can be made by switching provider. Electricity prices are set to go up even higher as we go into this winter, so that's why it will be important for people to look at their energy provider and see where they can switch to get better savings.
Okay, so obviously these panels and installing them cost a good bit of money. What sort of capital outlay is required at the very start? And I suppose maybe to put it into context in today's terms, with today's prices, or where we know electricity prices are for your own use, what sort of payback is there? How long will it take for farmers to get their money back?
Yeah, they vary in terms of, and it depends on the size. The bigger you go, the less that they cost per kilowatt installed. So you get great variation there in terms of, you could be down to 900 euro per kilowatt installed, up to maybe 1,600 euro per kilowatt installed, depending on the system. So like if you take and at the moment we're restricted under ESB rules to an 11 kilowatt PV array. Otherwise you have to pay for what's called a G10 relay, and that's kind of a restriction on what can go back to the grid at certain times in the case of an emergency, that they don't want systems to be sized above that. That's something that's set to change as well under the new microgeneration scheme to facilitate projects up to 50 kilowatts. So we will see that limit of 11 kilowatts changing. But if we take that current limit of 11 kilowatts, you would probably buy an 11 kilowatt system, including the inverter, for around 15,300 euro net of VAT. That system would generate in the region of around maybe 10,000 kilowatt hours of electricity per year. So it depends. Each business would need to be looked at individually to determine what percentage of the kilowatt hours of electricity generated would that business be able to utilize in a given year. So if you take a pig unit, they would certainly be able to probably put up a 50 kilowatt unit or even larger and use 100% of the electricity on that farm, because they have continuous demand with fans and moving feed augers, lighting systems, continuous base load demand on those farms, and animals are in all year round. If you take a dairy farm, that wouldn't be the case. They would only have the demand maybe between 2 to 4 kilowatt hours of a base load of electricity all the time, with spikes in the morning and spikes in the evening for the morning and evening milking. So that would be and then if the cows are out grazing during the day, they don't have that demand for electricity except for the cooling tanks. So it depends on the business as regards what their demand is going to be, and in some situations they may need battery to back it up and to release the energy from the battery at times of maybe at the night time when they're not producing electricity even out that.
And I was just thinking about your example there on the dairy farm. We switched that back maybe a little bit again, just thinking of our listener back to the potato store. The sun doesn't shine a whole lot as soon as the potatoes go in, and most of them are being cooled and ventilated, I suppose, through November all the way across till kind of February or March kind of thing. So would a farmer really get the best use out of it, do you think?
We get the best use out of it. I suppose again, it's I think it would make sense to use the solar PV for refrigeration units like that, where you wouldn't get the real benefit out of solar for January, February, and December, those particular months. But it does start to increase from February onwards as you get more daylight hours, and you don't necessarily need to have a lot of sunshine. You just need brightness. It's those particular 3 months where you're going to have less output per kilowatt.
It's really, as you say, it's really back to kind of individually speccing out a system for the given load or base load, as you call it, that's on the farm on a day-to-day basis, trying to get the best out of that. Barry, can you tell me just finally, where is the best place, or is there a number of places you can point our listeners to get good information that's suitable for the farming community in terms of how to spec it, where to put it, that kind of thing?
Yeah, I would say there are independent energy advisors around the country. I suppose by doing a Google search, you'll find some of those people. But there's what has been set up in recent times is one-stop shops by SEAI, and that's both to help people, with their domestic dwelling houses, to retrofit them and come up with plans for those houses as regards how they're going to insulate them and how they're going to improve the energy efficiency of them, and maybe put in heat pumps and to spec it all out. So those one-stop shops, to Google them would be well worthwhile, and to see what one-stop shop is operating in your functional area. There's a lot of information as well on the SEAI website. That's the Sustainable Energy Authority of Ireland, on their website, as regards being more energy efficient. Also, the SEAI on their website, they have got an energy training module on renewable energy, and that's something that I suppose businesses can get their staff to do. It doesn't take a lot of time to do it, but it's just acquainting people who are working on farms where a lot of energy is being used. It's acquainting them with terminology such as kilowatt hours, that they understand, the difference between LED lighting and fluorescent lighting, and the savings that can be made by moving to the likes of an LED light versus a CFL or a fluorescent light.
Okay. Thanks, Mary. That's brilliant. That's great to get a bit of an insight into solar PV. And as you mentioned before, and I think there's been some commentary on some of the social medias and elsewhere, the amount of land that potentially might end up under solar PV. Barry, you might have you back again if you're willing to come back, and maybe once these the likes of the feedstocks, and when that gets a little bit closer to a farmer actually trying to avail of them, we'll get you back so we can delve into that in a little bit more depth again.
Absolutely, Michael.
So that's it for this week, and my thanks to Barry for joining me on the podcast. There's just a couple of areas I want to mention before I sign off today. In order to understand the aspects of the podcast which are most appealing and beneficial to you, I would greatly appreciate if you could take 3 to 4 minutes to complete a survey. Details of this are in the podcast notes. The Teagasc Crops Forum is running again this year on Thursday, September the 8th in the Killashee Hotel, Naas. The event will cover areas such as what we can expect from CAP 2023 and the new Acres Environmental Scheme, but will also concentrate on the risks involved in producing crops for the 2023 harvest. Mark this in your calendar, and I'll certainly look forward to meeting you at the event. And finally, don't forget, if you enjoyed the podcast, then recommend it to a friend or colleague. And as always, rate, review, and follow on Apple Podcasts or Spotify so you never miss an episode. And for more information, go to teagasc.ie. I'm Michael Hennessy. Thanks for listening. I'll be back to you next week with more tillage news and advice.